Hey guys, so let's continue with my interview with Dan Gaylinn, practicing psychotherapist. In this installment, we get into psychedelics, how to use them for self-improvement, how to use them in conjunction with yoga to overcome deep-rooted fear and trauma, their pitfalls, and of course their proper use. Let's go! What do you think the role of psychedelics are in all of this, and what do you think about psychedelics in
Yeah,
general? Like
great.
goodness, bad, are
Yeah,
they
I
for
think we I
junkies
think we
or
laid
do
a
they have a
great
use?
foundation for this question. You know, Psychedelics sort of are a dissociate, what you might call a dissociative tool, in that they
Okay.
will enable you to sort of see uh, what psychologists call the gestalt, which is like the full picture, the big picture. As
Hmm.
much as you might have access to it. Different drugs, different psychedelics might serve different things or purposes, have different kinds of flavors or impacts. But broadly speaking, they're catalysts for dissociation from the traditional filters that we lay on our experience. Like I was saying before about how language sort of creates a reality tunnel or a trance. A psychedelic sort of opens up the parameters of that tunnel, and you sort of see yourself in a bigger picture. And we're learning a lot about um, the effect of these chemicals on the brain and how they impact what's known as the default mode network, which I interpret to be the ways in which we maintain a semblance of continuity in our everyday life. And
Hmm.
um, you know I am me, and this is who I am, this is my identity, this is how I know myself in these circumstances and situations. And when you take a drug like a psychedelic that sort of alters the default mode network such that more of the brain is communicating with more parts of the brain than is typical, then maybe you're
Wow.
putting um, um, you're making connections that you might not otherwise make. Now, that may be useful and helpful and serve in the service of psychotherapeutic benefits, such as overcoming trauma or um, dealing with grief or coming to terms with the existential givens that we talked about earlier, having an
Hmm.
emotional release, and the kinds of ways in which we are holding on, perhaps even white knuckling our semblance of reality. In some ways, the psychedelic will sort of hesitate to use the word force open, but they will coax you to open up in a way that you might not otherwise be able to, or you would have a hard time
Wow.
doing so, or would take a longer time doing so. Now, I would say that
Okay.
happens most successfully within what's called the set and setting of psychotherapy, which is you have a good, the primacy of the state of mind that we talked about earlier, that attitude, positive attitude, and good headspace, or an access to a resource state, a capacity to bring yourself into a relaxed state of mind in the here and now, and consciously breathing in the chest and feeling your grounding in your body.
Hmm.
These are tools that enable you to navigate what might otherwise be experienced as chaotic or confusing or scary. And so having a setting as well with a psychotherapist who's able to sort of be a ground control, I think is how it's been framed before. A
Interesting.
sober sort of confidant who is there sort of making sure that you know, um,
You're not going to freak out, I guess.
you're not going to freak out. Right. Yeah. Broadly speaking, and typically the way it's done in the research, the clinical research. I don't know if you've been tracking this, but we're sort of seeing a psychedelic renaissance for the first time in 35, 40 years since the 60s, that
Wow.
clinical trials are going to, phase 2, phase 3 in some cases. The FDA is going to approve MDMA and likely psilocybin and LSD for the purposes of treating psychological issues like trauma and grief in
Wow.
a circumscribed setting. so I don't imagine that this is going to be something that you're going to be able to get from your pharmacy and take whenever, but you're probably going to go to a clinic like you might for methadone treatment, with like if you were overcoming heroin, or chemotherapy if you were getting treated for cancer. It's like in a circumscribed setting with trained professionals undergoing a particular protocol where you're sort of establishing a healthy psychotherapeutic relationship with someone, and you develop a certain amount of trust and understanding of how the process will go. And then you have like a session that is sort of 8 or 10 hours long, or maybe you spend the night. You listen to pleasant music, you have access to nature, you're listening, you're drinking plenty of water, you're getting a good night's sleep the night before, you're resting, on a couch, and it's sort of a pleasant, supportive environment. Now,
so it works as like a catalyst. It works as a catalyst to a regime where you're putting a person through therapy, and then this is kind of like you're reducing it as a catalyst to kind of make them go along the direction that they're starting to go on anyway.
Right.
That's
right. One of the things that I find in my practice is, it's difficult if it, like I kind of referred to someone sort of white knuckling their semblance of reality as they see themselves, and that is in some ways what's keeping them stuck. And it's, without some kind of external agent like a psychedelic, although not exclusively to that. Sometimes, I don't know if you spoke to Garrett yet, but, some of his breathing exercises or the radical undoing exercises that he, works with can have as similar, if not more of a profound effect than some of these psychedelics can, in part because it breaks up your default mode network, your relationship to your body. It gets you to sort of step outside of your day-to-day experience and recognize like that, so much of it is in my mind, right? This isn't the reality of life. This is the lens that I'm projecting onto life, and life can actually be much fuller, than I'm letting it.
So like tying this back to like what we were saying before about building up this kind of direction into self-optimization, is the psychedelics kind of used as a way of just I guess like again like a catalyst to kind of accelerate that process, or is it used if the person's just not able to get over that initial resistance hump that we were talking, where they can't blast off, they're just caught too much in the gravity of
I mean, it's a little bit of both. I think that people will have some reticence, and that it is kind of like a little push, if you will, and some people need that. Like a catalyst is probably a good word for it. But I think it's important that you recognize that it is a catalyst for your own experience and not in the drug itself. And hopefully you're able to sort of take that experience and integrate it in a way that that your life is sort of the reminder, as it were. So you have to like having a spiritual practice that reminds you. It's like, oh, it humbles you, I think, is a word that I would use. It's, that like I can't be too arrogant or haughty about my particular perceptions of reality, because I know that that I am prone to making it up. You know what I'm saying? Once I recognize how flimsy it is, which is itself kind of unsettling.
So kind of like loosens up your thoughts a little bit. Like it's kind of like giving your brain a massage, in the sense it starts to loosen you to kind of get you unstuck.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that you are more like flexible. Hopefully you're able to maintain a certain amount of flexibility after. Now I do want to at least make mention of the potential pitfall of taking a psychedelic in an inopportune setting.
From my perspective, it's all the pop culture stuff. You hear about Hunter S. Thompson, you hear about all of that stuff that's happened, I guess a couple of decades ago.
Totally.
And then I have friends that have told me about their experiences going to places like Africa and doing ayahuasca
with a shaman, and how profound that experience was.
Wow.
I've talked to some people that are, really into the hard drugs, and it's just an interesting perspective, because like you hear this type of maybe just kind of like on the sidelines, this type of therapeutic use of them, and then also in the curiosity effect of like learning about Hunter S. Thompson and saying like,
Right.
why like this type of lifestyle is so intriguing. How is this motivated? So I guess with hearing about all of that, kind of reconciling that information with being able to say like, where's the line here of like, if I just went and did acid tomorrow, if I just, what would happen to me? Would I have like an enlightening experience, or would it just be very dangerous for me?
I mean, my sense of you is that you would probably be fairly responsible in your use of such a chemical, but it would be a good idea to be very thoughtful and intentional about how you use it, particularly if you're taking a high dose, where many people will report having had the most extraordinary experiences of their entire lives, so second, or perhaps more so than the birth of their own child, or it's on par with that, where
Wow.
it's so life transforming, where they experience themselves in the universe in a completely new light, for example. So it's a good idea to sort of be fairly intentional about how you want to approach that, not necessarily just sort of drop acid at a club, with some friends that you're not too keen on, and you're not sure about, because it's a good recipe. Or if you're like fresh out of a difficult emotional experience and you're trying to sort of escape it, well, it's likely going to come back to you in a way that
Interesting.
you can't easily avoid. So,
Interesting.
for better or worse, I mean, sometimes that's maybe not a terrible thing to confront your fear, as we were talking about earlier.
In that scenario, it would be the situation where you're really just like letting the snake out in the room in front of
Yes,
you.
right.
It's like taking the person and saying, okay, you're sitting on that couch, the snake is coming, just prepare.
Exactly. Right. And, you might get over the fear, or you might get bit.
Yeah, right?
Or something like that. And so, I mean, why take your chances? I like the analogy of like, if you know where the dragon is, and the dragon is, in this case, your fear, and it's guarding the gold, or the maiden in that, mythology, learn some sword play, which is like some of the breathing techniques, wear the armor, and prepare yourself accordingly, so that even if you don't successfully slay the dragon completely, you will have your encounter, and you'll be able to retreat if need be, having learned from that encounter, such that the next time you come back, you'll be more prepared. I like this analogy better.
So is this analogy talking about like learning the meditation techniques versus
Yep.
doing psychedelics, or is it like you should learn the meditation techniques and then you can do the psychedelics?
I do think that they fit well hand in hand, and I'm not necessarily biased to chicken or egg here to some degree, because a person can sit in meditation and really not get very far, in that they're not really sure what they're looking for, and they can be sort of stuck in their own head, and they can sort of peter out. And I think having some capacity of perspective that the psychedelic offers, and not just the psychedelic, to be sure, could be a near-death experience. It could be some other extraordinary or peak experience, as they're described in transpersonal psychology, something that sort of gets you out of your normal, everyday, ordinary frame of reference of the way the universe exists. And I think in some ways we know this intuitively as children. What's interesting is that like children, in some ways, if we think about it, particularly babies, are kind of tripping all the time. And if you look at in their eyes, in an infant's eyes, there is a similarity to like how they experience or perceive the world with how someone who is really deep in a psychedelic experience might be experiencing.
Wow.
Right?
Very interesting.
Where everything is sort of new. Maybe the eyes are dilated and there's a kind of awe and wonder and appreciation of mystery. And I think that there is a kind of a fundamental state where we trust, an inherent trust in the universe, or in trust in, hopefully, right? If you're, the conditions are right, or you have a supportive family or parent there, in the infant's upbringing, then there's a capacity to
which would be the role of the therapist in the regime that
Yes.
you're talking about. That's
Exactly.
it's like I guess it's a good analogy to have like a child where you're open to this strange new world, and the openness is what's driving the evolution, but
Yep.
there's still a snake over there, and if you
Yep.
don't know
Right.
if you don't know what it is and you go up
Yep.
to it, it's still going
Right.
to bite you.
Yes. Right. And
Interesting.
having a parent in the room saying like, no, don't touch, or no, it's a garter snake. See, you can touch it, you can pet it, it won't bite you. That's okay.
Wow.
Because I know
Yeah.
this snake, I know this particular snake is not going to hurt you. That one with the yellow spots, we keep in the cage, and we're not going to touch that one. Kind of thing.
Right.
Someone who can tell you
Gotcha.
the lay of the land, that can help.
So that's I think that's probably highlights like the dangers of doing like drugs recreationally, or doing it as like the whole party behavior, how that is actually not healthy and conducive at all, is actually quite dangerous, because
it can be.
then you are in a situation where you're putting yourself in a very vulnerable childlike state, but you're surrounding yourself with people that may not want to be the best influence in terms of your evolution.
Right. Exactly. So you're well, suited to take, intentional action when you approach this stuff. A certain amount of reverence and respect. If you blow the doors open, then you might get some benefit, but you may also be highly suggestible, and so taking a psychedelic in with the wrong crowd may sort of open you up to sort of some not so healthy ideas, or ways of thinking.
And would that actually like implant some real like deep rooted negativity possibly in you as well? Like, say you're doing psychedelics with I don't know, a drug dealer or some kind of sketchy character that's telling you to do things that are damaging.
Yeah.
That could actually put these kind of deep rooted blocks inside of you as well, eh?
Yeah, I think that's one of the ways in which authoritarian types or bullies or people sort of like will co-opt, and maybe there are elements of this in our human psychology in general, where we sort of have to balance the degree to which we think for ourselves versus sort of concede to others, and that can be toxic and abusive if we're not careful. Or create this kind of dynamic where you're subsumed to someone else's controls or manipulations. And
interesting. So I think it's almost like having a situation where you are able to kind of oversee your own evolution in a sense, where you're able to get yourself into open states, and psychedelics are a way of doing that. But then you also want to kind of you want to do your own parenting a little bit, of saying, I'm going to make sure that the influences that are going to come on to me are going to be positive, and I'm not going to be putting myself into
exactly. If I'm going to be in an open state, what am I opening to?
Right. Wow, it's
dissociative.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. And we're sort of at a tipping point where it's becoming legal. So we'll see how at least in a certain clinical setting.
All right, so what do you guys think about psychedelics? Have you guys had any success overcoming fear or trauma using them? Do you think they're legitimate in terms of using them for psychotherapy or self-improvement? Have you guys had any experiences? I'd love to hear about them. Leave them in the comments below. So for our next installment, we're going to talk about what makes someone good versus evil. We're going to dive into the Stanford prison study. We're going to talk about Dan's experiences with Philip Zimbardo and more. So stay tuned for that. And until then, do what makes you strong. Stop doing what makes you weak.